Imagine opening your garage door, only to find your HOA demanding access to your private space. But when you comply, they don't just inspect, they call 911. What's inside that box that could turn your life upside down? This is the shocking story of how a simple request spiraled into a nightmare. Welcome to the channel. We're glad to have you here. Drop a comment below and let us know which country you're watching from. We'd love to hear where you're tuning in from. It was a normal Tuesday when I found the envelope on my doorstep. The envelope was crisp, white, and stamped with the official logo of our Homeowners Association, HOA. Now, I'd lived in this community for years, and the HOA was nothing but a distant entity that occasionally sent out reminders about lawn care or the need to repaint fences. But today, as I held the envelope in my hands, I had a sinking feeling in my stomach. I opened it and pulled out the neatly typed letter. My eyes scanned the first few lines, but it wasn't until I reached the third paragraph that my heart sank into my stomach. Dear resident, it read, you are required to provide the HOA with access to your garage and property. This is part of a mandatory inspection scheduled for this month. Please ensure that a key to your garage is made available to our inspector. I read it again, my disbelief growing. Why on earth did they need access to my private property? I had always kept my garage neat and orderly. There were no violations, no issues. But as I reread the letter, it became clearer. This wasn't just a routine check. There was something more to it. It was as though the HOA were attempting to assert its authority in a way I had never experienced before. Why me? Why now? I sat at my kitchen table, trying to make sense of it. This was my space, my sanctuary. My garage, while cluttered, was mine. And now, it felt like it was being invaded by an organization I barely knew. The request felt intrusive, and frankly, unsettling. I decided to call the HOA office the next morning. I dialed the number on the letter, feeling increasingly apprehensive. The phone rang for a while before someone finally picked up. Hello. This is the HOA office. How can I assist you? The voice on the other end was calm and professional, but there was a coldness to it. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. I received a letter about an inspection and the need to provide access to my garage. Can you explain why this is necessary? There was a slight pause before the response came. It's a standard inspection, sir. We are conducting routine checks for any potential violations or safety hazards on the property. You are required to give us access to your garage for a brief inspection. I felt a slight twinge of anger, but kept my tone neutral. I've never had a violation before. I've always kept my garage in good condition. What exactly are you looking for? We just need to ensure that everything is up to code. We'll check for things like fire hazards, structural issues, or anything else that could potentially be dangerous, the voice explained, sounding almost rehearsed. That was all they said. And with that, I felt trapped. They were being vague, and that bothered me. What could possibly be wrong? My garage was simply a storage space for old furniture, tools, and seasonal decorations. I decided to comply, even though I felt uneasy. Reluctantly, I agreed to meet with a representative from the HOA later that day. I had no choice. I didn't want to be on the receiving end of any fines or penalties, so I decided to give them the key to my garage. It was just a routine inspection, they said, but somehow it felt like more than that. As the time for the inspection drew closer, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I began to second-guess myself. Was there something in my garage I hadn't noticed? Was there a safety violation I had missed? I walked to my garage, the key heavy in my hand. I opened the door slowly, feeling a cold shiver run down my spine. Inside, it was just as I remembered. The shelves were stacked with boxes, mostly holiday decorations, some old books, and other odds and ends. There were a few pieces of furniture, covered with old sheets, but nothing seemed out of place. But then, my eyes were drawn to a cardboard box on the top shelf. I didn't remember putting it there. It was newer, and I certainly didn't recall moving it to the shelf. There was a knot in my stomach as I approached it. I reached for the box, carefully sliding it down from the shelf. It was heavier than I expected. My heart was pounding as I opened it. Inside, there were old papers, documents from my father's estate, things I hadn't gotten around to sorting through. There were legal contracts, deeds, old receipts, nothing extraordinary, but one of the documents caught my eye. It was an old deed to a piece of property my father had owned years ago. I stared at it for a long time, my mind racing. Why had it been tucked away in the back of the box, hidden under other paperwork? It had always been in my family, and there was no reason to keep it a secret, but the sense of unease didn't leave me. The box had been moved recently. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't the only one who knew about it. The HOA representative arrived shortly after I had placed the box back on the shelf. She introduced herself and extended her hand. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with us," she said in a businesslike tone. Her smile seemed polite, but her eyes were sharp, scanning the room with a sense of purpose. We exchanged pleasantries, but I felt the tension building in my chest. She was here to inspect my garage, but why did I feel like she was here for something more? Something I wasn't aware of. She glanced around the room and made some notes on her clipboard. "Everything seems fine here," she remarked, but her voice lacked enthusiasm. "However, we need to check the other side of the garage." As she walked toward the back of the space, my gaze flickered to the shelf with the box. Her eyes followed mine, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw her expression shift. Then, to my horror, she moved toward the box and started rifling through the papers. I stood frozen, my heart racing as the representative began to go through the contents of the box. I had no idea what she was looking for, but the tension in the air was palpable. It felt like everything in the room had come to a halt. "What are these documents?" she asked, pulling out the deed. Her voice was sharper now, her tone more demanding. I tried to remain calm. "Just old family records. Nothing of importance." She didn't seem convinced. Instead, she looked at the deed, her eyes narrowing. "I'll need to make a call," she said, her voice suddenly distant. I didn't know what to think. Why was she so interested in these documents? Why did something as innocuous as family papers warrant a phone call? She stepped away, dialing her phone. I overheard her mutter something about potentially illegal activity. My stomach dropped. What was she talking about? What was in that box that could possibly raise alarm? Her voice grew more urgent as she spoke into the phone. "Yes, I need to report something. It could be related to unreported property, possible criminal activity." I was stunned. What was happening? This was just paperwork. Old records from my father. There was nothing illegal here. The representative ended the call, and she looked at me with a solemn expression. "I am afraid I have no choice but to call the authorities," she said. "I'll be dialing 911 within moments." The sound of sirens filled the air. I stood by the garage door, feeling like I was caught in a nightmare. How had things escalated so quickly? This was just a misunderstanding, right? The police arrived, their uniforms sharp and professional. They approached the garage with caution, glancing at me as though I were a criminal. My mind was spinning. What had happened? What had she found that warranted involving the police? The officers began inspecting the garage. They questioned me about the documents, asking where they had come from, why I hadn't reported them sooner, and if I was aware of any legal discrepancies. But I had no answers. The paperwork was legitimate family records and nothing more. After hours of questioning, the officers finally came to a conclusion. "These documents are legitimate," one officer said, his tone softening. "There's no criminal activity here." I let out a sigh of relief. The tension in the air lifted, but I was still confused. Why had the HOA representative gone so far as to involve the police? Why had she called 911 over something so trivial? As I stood there, the representative apologized, but her apology felt hollow. She was as cold as ever, offering no explanation for her actions. In the days that followed, the HOA issued an official apology, but the damage had been done. I could no longer view the HOA in the same light. The organization I had trusted seemed to have crossed a line, and I wondered, was this truly a mistake, or had they been looking for an excuse to invade my privacy all along? Though everything had been resolved, I couldn't shake the feeling that something more was going on. Something that would stay with me long after the incident was over. I couldn't help but feel violated. It wasn't just the call to 911 or the way the situation spiraled out of control. It was the unsettling realization that the HOA, an organization I had trusted, was capable of such overreach. And so, I walked away from it all, knowing that my relationship with the HOA would never be the same. The garage, once a place of peace, would now forever hold the memories of that afternoon when everything changed.